We will now look at solving other percent problems. Our first example says 40% of what number is 250? To answer these questions, we will translate the words of the problem into an equation and then solve the equation. There are common words or phrases that we often encounter in problems. You can see two of these in the box on the right-hand side of the screen. This box reminds us that the word of in mathematics symbolizes multiplication, and that the word is translates into an equal to or an equal sign. So let's begin by taking the 40% in our problem and translating it into a decimal. Remember, to change a percent to a decimal, we want to move our decimal place 2 places to the left. So 40% would be equivalent to, when we're moving our decimal to the left, so 1 place, 2 places, 0.40. And next we see the word of, and we know that that indicates multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and put a multiplication sign there. 40% of what number? And so let's let the what number equal x, since that's what we're looking for. Is, we know that is translates into an equal sign. And then we have the 250. And so we have an equation that looks like 0.40x equals 250. Now, to solve that equation, we simply need to divide both sides of the equation by 0.40, and that will solve for x. And so plugging into our calculator, 250 divided by 0.40 gives me 625. Let's continue with the second example. What percent of 15,000 is 1,125? So again, if we're looking for the percentage, we're going to let that be our x. We see the word of, which translates into a multiplication. And we know that it's of 15,000. The is going to be an equal sign. And then we have our 1,125. And so again, if we rewrite our equation, we have 15,000 times x equal to 1,125. To solve the equation for x, we're going to divide both sides of the equation by 15,000. And so plugging into our calculator, 1,125 divided by 15,000 gives us 0.075. And we do want to write that final answer as a percentage. And so remember that in order to change a decimal to a percent, you'll move your decimal place 2 places to the right. And so our final answer will be 7.5%. Our third example, 60% of 825 is what number? So again, we'll take the 60% and we'll write it as a decimal. 60% is equivalent to 0.60. The of translates into multiplication, and we'll bring the 825 down. The is an equal to, and then what number? Let's call it x. And so we have an expression, 0.60 times 825 is equal to x. Multiplying 0.60 times 825 gives me 495 as my x value. So 60% of 825 is 495. Our next question asks, what is 7% of 2,000? We may want to rewrite this and phrase the question similar to what we saw in the first three examples. The question is asking us 7% of 2,000 is what number? And so let's continue by translating the words in the problem into an equation. So 7%, we know that we could write as 0.07. The of translates into multiplication. The is translates into an equal sign. And what number? We'll let that be the x. And so on our calculator, we'll say 0.07 times 2,000 gives me 140. And so 7% of 2,000 is 140. The next example says 67.5 is what percent of 75? And so we begin by translating the words in the problem into a math equation. We'll rewrite the 67.5 as is. The is translates into an equal sign. What percent? That's what we're looking for, so we'll let that be an x. The of reminds us to multiply. And then we have 75. So our equation, just simplifying it just a little bit, looks like 67.5 is equal to 75 times x. And to solve this equation, we would need to take both sides of the equation and divide by 75. Plugging into our calculator, 67.5 divided by 75 gives me 0.9, which remember that we want to write as a percentage. We'll move that decimal place 2 places to the right, adding a 0 in the space. And so 90% is our answer. Our next example is a little different. 800 high school students were asked to name their favorite sport. Determine the number of students who named tennis as their favorite sport. And so if we look at our problem, we see that tennis corresponds to a percentage of 12%. So what the problem is saying, or what it's asking us to do, is it's asking, what is 12% of 800. We know that there were 800 students altogether. 12% of those students like tennis. We need to figure out how many students that actually is. And so again, we may want to rewrite this in the format that we're a little more comfortable with. We might want to say 12% of 800 is what number? And now we'll translate into a math equation. The 12%, we'll write it as 0.12. The of, we'll write as a multiplication. We'll rewrite the 800. The is, we'll write as an equal sign. And what number will use x? And so 0.12, using our calculator, 0.12 times 800 is 96. So there were 96 students that named tennis as their favorite sport. Our last example says 100 people were asked to name their favorite fruit. What percent of people named apples as their favorite fruit? So if we look at our chart, we can see that the apple corresponds to the light purple, and we see that the number that we're looking at is 35 for the apples. So we need to know the percentage. We need to know the answer to this question. 35 is what percent of 100? And so again, we can translate the words of the problem into an equation. 35 is, we're going to write 35, and in place of the is, we're going to put an equal sign. What percent? We'll let that be x, since that's what we're looking for. The of translates into multiplication, and we have our 100. So basically our equation looks like 35 is equal to 100x, and we need to solve this equation for x. And we do so by dividing both sides of the equation by 100. And so if you need your calculator here, we're going to end up getting 0.35 when we divide 35 by 100. And remember, the question is asking for a percentage, so we want to give our final answer as a percent. So moving that decimal place 2 places to the right would give me 35%.